So this is an introduction to the concept of inflection in Latin. Inflection is the most stark difference between Latin and English. So understanding how it works is essential to beginning to learn. English does inflect many of its words, but not nearly as many as does Latin, and not half as systematically. Follow along, take notes, and be prepared to answer questions about inflection later on. This is going to be somewhat grammar heavy, which may seem laborious to you, but I promise you that the result will be a better understanding of the language, which will be more enjoyable for you. So let's go. There's good news and bad news for an English speaker who is beginning to learn the Latin language. The good news first is that Latin and English both have the same 8 parts of speech. Verbs, nouns, pronouns, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. If you're looking at this list of parts of speech and thinking, wow, I don't know exactly what these are in English, much less in Latin, don't worry. This class will be a study in English grammar almost as much as it will be in Latin grammar and usage. The important thing to note is that Latin can be and has been organized into the same parts of speech as English, which means that we can use the same kind of structural language, grammar, as we use in English to talk about Latin. So if that's the good news, what is the bad news? The bad news is that Latin accomplishes the connections that it makes between these parts of speech in a sentence in very, very, very different ways. Inflection is an inherent part of the Latin language that English has largely lost and replaced with other grammatical systems. So let's talk about the difference between English and Latin. So, English, for example, adds words to its verbs to inflect them. When we want our verbs to change person or number, we add words, often without changing the form of the verb a whole lot. So, I run. We take the verb run, and when we want to have the first person singular, we just add the pronoun I. I is essential to the meaning of run when I say I run. Same with you run, he runs, she runs, we run, you all run, they run. So when we want to change mood or tense, we even add more words. That was just the forms of the present tense. I run is first person singular, present active indicative in English. But we can say the perfect, I have run. We can say the perfect subjunctive, I would have run. We can say the future, I will run. Or the future perfect, I will have run. The past aggressive, I was running. Or the simple past, I ran. As you can see, in all of these uses of the verb to run, only the last form, really, the simple past, I ran, changed the stem of the verb. Otherwise, the only thing we did in the present tense was to add an S when we say he runs or she runs. So we do inflect our verbs, but very, very sparingly. And we use helping verbs and pronouns to change the meaning of our verbs. This is not what Latin does at all. In almost every case, when you want to convey a different person or number or tense or mood in Latin or voice, you simply change the form of the verb. There are no extra words involved. All of the meaning that you need is encoded into the stem and the ending of the verb. So the same example in Latin of I ran or I run needs no extra words. We just need curro, which means I run. And then when we want to say you run, he, she, it runs, we run, you all run, they run, We're just taking the stem of the verb and adding the endings. It's the same when we want to change tense and mood. This is the present active indicative, kurro, I run. I have run. I would have run. I will run. I will have run. I was running. So, as you can see, the only thing that changes is that in the perfect forms, there is a slight difference in the stem. So, as you can see, no extra words, just the verb, and that is inflection. That is specifically to verbs, it is conjugation. So, not only does Latin inflect its verbs, but it also inflects its nouns, adjectives, and pronouns. We call this declension or declining. We decline nouns, adjectives, and pronouns, and we conjugate verbs. So, does English do that? Do we decline anything? The answer is yes, but barely. Virtually all the rest of the time, we rely on word order to determine the meaning of nouns in a sentence. So, if I say, the dog bites the man, you know that the subject is the dog because I put the dog before the verb. You also know that the dog has bitten the man because the man is after the verb. He's the object. Subject, verb, object is the standard order for most English sentences, and with a few exceptions, we do not like to speak any other way. Sometimes when we're being poetic, we'll mix up the order, but it's always clear what we mean. So, the man bites the dog. We've simply changed the order. Now we know that the man is the subject and the dog is the object. Latin word order matters less. It still matters, but it matters much less because Latin is going to inflect its nouns to determine the meaning of the sentence. So here are two Latin sentences, the same Latin that we had in English on the previous slide. So, canis virum mordet means the dog bites the man. If we say virum canis mordet, we haven't changed the form of canis or virum. We've changed the order, but it still means the dog bites the man. So, if we wanted to say that the man is biting the dog, we would say vir canem mordet. We would change vir to the nominative case and canis to canem, the accusative case. We'll get into the cases and what they are and what they mean later on. But here, all you need to know is that Latin doesn't use word order to tell people how to understand the meaning of the nouns in a sentence. It uses inflection. It uses declension or declining. So canem vir mordet means the same thing, roughly the same thing as vir canem mordet. English punctuation matters. We love punctuation, and it's actually a part of our speech. We cause ourselves to dip and rise in our tone to signal the punctuation we use. We love periods, commas, quotation marks, question marks, semicolons, you name it. So this sentence in English, a panda eats shoots and leaves, is telling us that there's an animal called a panda, and that it eats two kinds of things, shoots and leaves. But if we punctuate this sentence differently, it means that there's a mad panda on the loose who has eaten something, shot the place up, and now he has left. So the commas in this sentence make all the difference. And this is maybe one of the most interesting grammatical technologies that English has. We love our punctuation, and we're really good at changing the meaning of our sentences and paragraphs and prose with these marks. Classical Latin doesn't have punctuation per se, at least not as we would regard it as an indispensable part of the meaning of the sentence. There are little dots and tittles in Latin, especially in late Latin, but there is no reason, given the nature of the Latin language, for there to be punctuation in a sentence. So context will tell you what the meaning of a sentence is. I will punctuate the exercises and the tests and the assessments that you get to help you along, but the understanding should be that those don't really belong there. They're just sort of training wheels for you to help understand the Latin language. So just to be clear, inflection is only a part of certain aspects of the Latin language. Latin conjugates verbs, but it declines nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and sometimes it declines adverbs, but there are lots of adverbs that are indeclinable. So ultimately, we're going to give adverbs the blue decline color, but we're going to put it in the column with doesn't inflect. Prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections never inflect. They are always one form, and hopefully that's good news. One more thing about inflection before we wrap up. Latin words have roots and stems, just like a tree, and you've heard me using these words root and stem and ending. So what does that mean? Well, the root is the most basic component of a word, which contains this vague idea of whatever it is that can be turned into all sorts of words by adding stems. So you have the root voc. This is a Latin root that generally has something to do with to call or to summon something or somebody. So that's the root. So when we add the stem a, the long a, to the root voc, we get the stem of the verb vocare, to call, and we get voco, vocas, vocat, vocamus, vocatis, and vocant. So, as you can see, the root is in this greenish color. The stem is in the blue color, and then the ending is in the red color. So that's the distinction between a root, a stem, and an ending. Why does this even matter? Well, you'll see a verb like vocal, to call, and you'll also see a noun stem like voc. So the noun stem has taken the root voc and lengthened the O. Now it has this stem voc, to which it adds vox, vocis, voci, vocem, and voce. So these are the forms of the word for a voice, which you can understand why they come from the same base. They have the same root. They have the same idea. This is very important in Latin. You can add at or atto to voc and have vocatus, which is a noun meaning called. You can add azione and you can have vocationis. Many of you are trying to discern a vocationis right now. This is simply voc, the root, plus azion, the stem, and is, the ending. So, calling. You can also have a vocula, which is a little voice. This is just adding ulla, the Latin diminutive stem, and you have little voice. So these building blocks of the language are really important because you'll frequently see noun forms and verb forms of the same root. In terms of your vocabulary, if you recognize the root of a particular word, you can surmise what the meaning of that noun or verb form is. You will often, in our course, be given the noun, verb, and even adverb forms of a word to learn together. So that's an important piece to keep in mind. You won't be tested on this idea this week. It's just an interesting thing that I want you to know, and it will help you in your vocabulary studies in particular.